So here's this DevOps interview question that sounds very, very simple until somebody actually asks you this question. So you've been given a Linux server. How would you harden it? How would you protect it? How would you make it highly secure? Don't just say I will build a firewall. I will configure a firewall. No, you have to think strategically. You have to think in layers. You have to elicit this information. This is what makes you to feel like you've worked in production. So first, you want to reduce the attack surface. For engineers, this is very important. If the server doesn't need a service, why expose it? So just remove or disable it. If it doesn't need a port exposed, close it. Your server shouldn't be listening on 10 ports when the application only needs to. All right. So the next, you want to secure SSH access. You want secure SSH access, by the way. So don't allow direct root login. Give engineers individual accounts and use sudo only when administrative privileges are required. For example, you can have managed environments, or in most environments, we use SSH key instead of password for authentication, and we protect those keys very carefully. I've mentioned this in a different video that you could use HashiCorp Vault. You could use, if it's AWS, you could use AWS Secret Manager. If it's Kubernetes directly, you want to use something from Bitnami that seals secrets. There are so many secure ways to keep your secrets. So yeah, those things you want to do. And by the way, you can create a sudo group, and under that group, now you add any user you add to the group will automatically get that sudo privilege, especially if it's an administrator. Then the next thing you want to do is you want to apply least privilege. Now, not everybody who can access a server needs root privileges to the server. So give users and service accounts only the permissions that they need, only the permissions they need. So the next thing is you want to patch the system. An application can perfectly be secured while the operating system underneath it is running packages with known vulnerabilities. You know, this thing called CVEs. So you want to keep patching. You want to have a workflow that is monitoring the server and patching whatever base, image or container that you're using. So you want to keep the OS and security critical packages, you want to keep them patched. But in production, you want to test updates before building and applying them. Be very careful. This is in production. Now, then the next thing is you configure that firewall that we talked about in the first place. If it's in AWS, for example, you may have security groups that you use to control traffic at the cloud layer. And you can also enforce controls on the host itself using tools like NF tables, right? You can use firewall D, you can use UFW. Yeah, depending on your distribution, you can take advantage of any of these ones to have some kind of control of traffic in and out of your server. And remember, if a port doesn't need to be reachable, do not expose it. So the next thing is you want to protect your data. You want to protect your data as much as possible. Use encryption at rest for sensitive disks and for sensitive data as well, and of course your volume. And you use encryption in transit for network communication. Like, again, we'll talk about AWS. You could use KMS, for to encrypt your services, your data, your disk, your volume whenever they are at rest. At rest means they're not being transferred. And while in transit, you use TLS to control, to secure, to encrypt your data while in transit. So and that does not only end with AWS. There are so many things are popping in the head. Now, the next thing you want to think about is brute force attacks and intrusion detection. Brute force. There can be attackers whose only aim, and bots whose only aim is just to send a loop of, maybe a loop of 1,000 lines of intrusion against your API. So you want to use tools like fail to ban. Of course, that's a tool, not advertising, but it's a very good tool. It can detect repeated failed authentication attempts. So basically, this must have happened to so many people. You're trying to access a browser, your password is wrong the first time, the second time, the third time, it blocks you. It tells you to have a cooldown of about 3 minutes, or maybe you should contact the administrator. Yes, tools like fail to ban can detect repeated failed authentication attempts and temporarily block these abusive addresses, the abusive IP addresses. So, but security isn't only about blocking attacks. So you also need to know when something unusual is happening. Say, for instance, you want to enable logging and monitoring in your server, in your cloud environment. You want to monitor authentication events. You want to monitor privilege escalation. I mentioned in one of the videos as well, sometimes hackers or attackers, especially when your keys, when your credentials, when they get exposed, you want to monitor if someone has attempted any escalation of privilege, any resource usage, any kind of limit, any suspicious processes. You can do that in AWS following CloudTrail to monitor this, or you check your bill and all that. So if any important configuration changes have happened, you want to consider that. Now, depending on the environment, that could involve Journal D. Of course, you can use ODD, you can use your CM, you can use your other monitoring and security, tooling. I don't want to start mentioning now, so it's not like I'm discussing monitoring tools. You could use your Prometheus even to scrape to know whatever is going on, but Prometheus may not be, in this case. So, and one more thing people often forget is backups. People forget to do backup. This is a server. They are ephemeral. They could shut down at any time. You could have serious production workloads that are that could go down at any time, and this is not good for business. So for business logic, you could have your SLO. So you need to have you need to be able to back up for what's that word called again? To be able to recover. I've forgotten that word. So you can recover any hardship on time. So a hardened server without tested backups can still become business disaster. You must have a backup, and you must have tested your backup in a lower environment, of course. So if you're asked this in an interview, don't memorize 20 Linux commands. Don't memorize so many things. I've made mention of very many points there, as well as talk about scenarios and examples. So remember the strategy. The strategy is, first and foremost, you want to reduce the attack surface, which is very important. You want to have a secure access into your server, your cloud environment. You don't want to use password to log in. You want to apply least privileges. You don't give sudo or escalator privileges. If it's in your, say for instance, in AWS, you can control that using your IAM and assumed roles to manage, the trust and everything. And you need to patch vulnerabilities regularly. And before you patch vulnerabilities, you want to make sure that you have carefully studied and study every new changes that are going to be happening, especially if it's in a production environment. You don't just want to blindly update or patch any application. You want to check the dependencies, right? Then again, you want to control your network traffic. I did mention of some tools that you can use. You want to control using security groups and so many other things that you can use to stop to control, not stop, the flow of traffic. Then again, you want to protect your data as much as possible, to have them encrypted while at rest, while in transit. I mentioned of some tools. There are so many other encryption tools that could be used for this process as well. You want to did I mention protection of data also has to do with backing up your data to have a backup, and you have tested the backup in a rushy hostile you want to rehash a breakdown. You want to rehash the fact that it may happen disaster, sorry, yeah, that's the word. You want to rehash disaster recovery. So and most of it, you want to monitor everything that is going on. You want to monitor your workload, your server. You want to keep an eye on it. And yeah, I hope that makes sense. I hope you understand. I hope someone learned something from this. That is how you answer question like an engineer instead of listing tools. I know I did list some tools that you could use, but it's not about listing the tools. It's really about how you are able to put yourself in that position. Feel free to even say you want to take a breath, maybe for a second, so you can simulate it, but please do not be traumatic, because this should be like every day that you go through situations like this, or at least you have gone through situations like this before. So thank you. I hope you liked the video. Please like and subscribe, share this video to as many people that may need it, save it for some other day in case you're not able to get access to it. Cheers.